Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Larouche organization with your daily video update for August 30th, 2022. Today I'm going to take a look at this question of global NATO moving toward a top-down dictatorship. What we're seeing is an effort to silence any opposition, to shut down any protests against the insane policies that are driving us toward World War III, possible nuclear war, and toward a global financial meltdown, which could mean horrible conditions for hundreds of millions, if not billions of people, many of whom are already facing starvation as a result of policies of the last 20 years. Now, this is made really quite explicit, this drive toward dictatorship, in comments from the head of the Verfassungsschutz, which is the equivalent in Germany of the FBI, Thomas Haldenwang. And he made 2 points about what he called Russian propaganda, warning about the attempt by the Russians and Putin to shape the policies of the West by disinformation. He said that to blame NATO for the Ukraine war is Putin propaganda. He also said to deny that Russia's invasion is the cause of inflation is Putin propaganda. Now, both of these are provable factors that NATO's activity in the lead up to the February 2022 invasion or military operation of Ukraine, that NATO's policy left Putin with no option, not just what happened in February, but in the preceding 8 years. This is easily debatable. Well, you're not allowed to debate it anymore in Germany unless you want to be accused of being a Putin propagandist. Now, the attempt to silence opposition, whether it's on Ukraine, whether it's on discussion of the economy, is now becoming evident in the actions that are being taken in Ukraine itself, but not necessarily driven by Ukrainian policy, but by the policy of NATO. Just one example, though. A law was passed in Ukraine in the last days, which makes it illegal for 70% of the workforce that are in unions to participate in unions. That is the shutdown of collective bargaining in Ukraine, the shutdown of unions. Does this remind you of anything? Do people know about the emergency decree in March 1933 in Nazi Germany, which made unions shut down unions? It's exactly what we're seeing now playing out today in Ukraine. The attack on the opposition, the so-called democratic nation of Ukraine, which is shutting down opposition papers, opposition parties, jailing people who don't go along with Zelensky, and assassinating some of them. Now, why is this so important that they shut down the opposition? They gag the opposition. Well, just a few examples. The Belgian Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, said yesterday, quote, about the economic crisis, "We must be transparent. The coming months will be difficult. The coming winters will be difficult. The next 5 to 10 winters will be difficult." He's predicting 5 to 10 years of people not having heat, not being able to afford electricity. Well, that's apparently what he's saying. Then you have from Macron, who said, quote, "The age of abundance has ended." And what he said is that one of the aspects of this is the quote, "endless cash flow must end," unquote. Now, the endless cash flow has been the way that the European Union and the US Federal Reserve and all the central banks have kept this financial system liquid, even though it's insolvent. Now, this matches the statement of Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell out at the Jackson Hole, Wyoming conference this last weekend, where he just said austerity is necessary. Expect pain, P-A-I-N, expect pain. He said higher rates to fight inflation will cause pain for consumers and for businesses, but there's no alternative. And he said if it doesn't stop inflation, he'll have to take much more aggressive measures similar to those of Paul Volcker in the early 80s, where the interest rates soared to 20% and higher. Now, to enforce this policy, they're prepared to use censorship, lies, threats, assassination, and war. If you don't go along, you risk being identified as an information terrorist, a war criminal working on behalf of Putin. I'm on the official target list of Myrotvoretz, which is the Ukrainian counter-disinformation unit, which is suspected in targeting, or which has been identified, I should say, in targeting officials who are slated for, quote, liquidation, unquote. The most recent being Daria Dugina, who was assassinated a little more than a week ago in Moscow. Also on this list is Helga Larouche. Also is Diane Sara, candidate for U.S. Senate in New York opposing Schumer. There are threats from this Myrotvoretz, but what we're demonstrating in an article that will be out soon, and I'll get to this in a moment, this is not initiated by Ukraine. It's initiated by NATO, by the U.S. State Department and intelligence communities. It's funded by the U.S. Congress. Your tax dollars are going to fund an assassination bureau to silence opposition to the policies of the Biden administration and the NATO governments. Now, in responding to this, Helga Larouche made a very straightforward statement yesterday. She said, quote, "We don't need Putin to have an intelligence evaluation of why we are at the edge of the abyss of World War III, unquote." She said the same thing about the economic crisis. We don't need Putin to tell us this. We have the evidence from repeated forecasts of Lyndon Larouche. And just to cite a few, the 1984 Larouche warned of the coming collapse of the Soviet Union, which he said would happen within 5 years. He was basically right. In 1988, he said, we will soon see a reunification of Germany. Well, that happened in 1989, and almost no one saw it coming. Larouche had policies to address these things, but the opportunity was lost between assassination of key figures, such as Alfred Herrhausen and others, the potential to take this historic moment of the collapse of the Soviet Union and achieve a coordinated global development perspective was lost with the emergence of the so-called sole superpower, or the unipolar world, that was largely a function of the neoconservatives and neoliberals in the United States and London. Now, in the economy, Larouche in 1995 unveiled what he called his triple curve function, which showed how if you keep a increased flow or have an increased flow of monetary aggregates to back up the worthless financial aggregates, that is the debt instruments, the bonds, the junk bonds, the derivatives, that if you increase the monetary flow to keep those instruments liquid, you will not only have inflation, but you'll have a collapse of production. Again, this wasn't Putin who said this. This came from Lyndon Larouche, who is targeted to be silenced by the same network that today is part of global NATO. Now, in terms of the war threat, you can see what was done after 2017, but it was actually already there in the Obama administration. But look at the National Defense Authorization Act that was passed in 2017, which reported the shift from the global war on terror to an emphasis on great power challenges. That is confrontation with Russia and China. That was there in 2017. It was there for anybody to see. This isn't Putin propaganda. This is the U.S. Congress passing this Defense Authorization Act. Now, of course, the global war on terror was a fraud, going back to the sole superpower idea that the United States and its allies, including London and NATO, have the right to target any political leader in the world, any government leader, any state in the world that doesn't go along with the policy of the global banks. Now, we've pointed out recently that the inflation as a product of Larouche's triple curve function is coming from the result of the move toward the Great Reset. That is to protect the insolvent banks and financial institutions and hedge funds by pumping money into the system, which is the cause of inflation. We didn't need Putin to tell us that. The post-2008 period has been one of bailouts, debt rollover, endless quantitative easing. What Larouche called for is orderly debt reorganization, including debt moratoria and debt cancellation, and a replacement of providing liquidity to speculators, instead, liquidity to producers. That's the solution to inflation. The only producers that are getting money right now are those producing military equipment, billions of dollars of which are going into arming the Ukrainian government. So it's in this moment that we see the escalation of attack on the Schiller Institute, people who are co-thinkers with the Schiller Institute, people who are courageous enough to come and speak at our conferences, as well as others such as Senator Rand Paul, Tulsi Gabbard, people who have been put on this Myrotvoretz hit list. Now, one of the interesting developments in the last days is that the Russian language BRICS Research Committee has posted the Schiller Institute call for an ad hoc committee for a new Bretton Woods on its website. So our policies are shaping the discussion of how to establish a new financial architecture and a new security architecture. That's why we're under attack, not because we're a mouthpiece for Putin. So I would urge you to look at what we're putting out, what the Schiller Institute is producing, this mobilization for the new security and financial architecture. Instead of having this discussion suppressed, join us. Make sure it's heard by an increasing number of people. And we will have, in the next days, a new report out from Gretchen Small in the Executive Intelligence Review under the headline, Ukraine's Information Terrorist Blacklist. Global NATO issues hit order against advocates of peace. We'll have this posted on the Schiller Institute website, on the Executive Intelligence Review website. I'll put a link once it comes out on my daily update. And this is the kind of material you need to be able to ensure that a global dictatorship is not put in place because you won't let it. Join us to make sure that we stop it. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow.